And the purpose of that is obviously that it's not only fulfilling a constitutional requirement, but also an opportunity to explain to the members of parliament and to the public the logic of the appropriations law before parliament, in addition to some of the achievements the previous year and what execution of government policies I expect to achieve again in the coming year. In addition to that, he mentioned slightly the funding proposals. I mean, the commitments for expenditure is close to, as everybody said, more than 4 trillion, 4.7 trillion in our calculation. The funding for county governments through the equity sharing and national revenue. Talked about a multitude of other areas in which government has directed expenditure on education and health, infrastructure, and many other things, of course, business creation and all that. And then in the second part of the conversation, the cabinet secretary spoke about the funding proposals and the funding mechanisms, which is basically how the taxes will be raised, the estimation of those taxes. Then obviously how the distribution of that total expenditure will be, and some of the goals that he, or rather the treasury hopes will be achieved once this once the present budget starts to be passed through. In addition to other changes in laws, regulations, and many other things that the affairs of government. Now, as a tradition, the Institute of Economic Affairs conducts an analysis of the budget to try and find. Remember here, the budget talk about the proposals, which is the appropriations, including both the ways in which the money is going to be raised, what its effects will be on households, on farms, and individuals. And then on the other side, talk about what the expenditure means in terms of the policy content of that expenditure, also the quality of that policy. So here we are today. I'm grateful that you're with us this morning. Three of my colleagues will present different phases of the budget in terms of the explanations, in terms of the expenditure drives. Now, the reason we are here is this morning is to unpack the budget and to allow for those numbers to speak in terms of what those numbers mean. To try and link those numbers to what the effects would be for Kenyan citizens, households, farms, and thirdly, basically, in addition to the stock taking, to hope that as journalists you have some clarifications, or at least to gain a greater clarity and are able to feed that back to those who read or those who interact with your media pieces. So I'll invite my colleagues, three colleagues, and we have a program here, as we say, this will be a 2-hour program, so we hope to be done by 11. So my colleague, Faith Nzomo, will go first, and she'll be presenting a macroeconomic context. I think the macroeconomic context support how the budget, or in what conditions, material conditions, the budget is being ran is an essential part. So she's coming for the first 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and she'll be presenting the macroeconomic performance over the last year. In our view, that history is important so that whatever proposals of expansion, whatever proposals of taxation should be understood within the context of the last few years. So it should be followed thereafter by Dr. Muyo, who's also a program officer in the Public Finance Management Program. Dr. will talk about the budget factor and isolating certain expenditure, the distribution of the budget in terms of the expenditure by sector. And then at that part, we Jack who's a program officer in the non-economic program. We talk about budget allocation between independent institutions. Now, independent institutions, we justify why we think the analysis of the budgets of independent institutions is important. And after that, of course, we hope that will be done in an hour. We can open up to a plenary discussion where we can read some of your questions and hopefully answer and give you some perspectives from the IEA's, give you some opinions from the IEA's perspective. So now, without further ado, I invite Faith to you have 15 minutes.
Good morning, everyone. As you have heard, my name is Faith Nzomo, and I'm taking you through the first part of this presentation that is on the macroeconomic context. And my colleagues, Raphael and Jackie, will give you the analysis of the budget, that is the actual numbers. To begin with, you look at this is our outline. We'll start with the macroeconomic outlook. That is what I'm taking you through, followed by the budget outstand, revenue performance, CFS, and sectoral analysis, which Raphael will take you through. And finally, Jackie will take you through the Judicial and Independence Commission's budget outlay. On the economic performance, our analysis covered a period of around 11 years. That is from the year 2013 all the way to last year, that is 2023. And the reason for this is because we wanted to know how the economy has been performing for the last around 11 years and after revolution. So the green bar graph represents the real GDP growth for Kenya. And as you can see, our growth has been above the 4% mark. And in comparison to the Sub-Saharan African growth, you can see we are growing at a higher rate. And also in comparison with, we've compared this with the growth rate for Tanzania and Uganda. And we can say we are doing well in terms of, we are growing better compared to these two countries. So for last year, our growth was at around 5%, 5.5%, and the prediction was that this year growth will be around 5%. But we think that the economy might grow at a lower rate because of the effects of the adverse effect of the flooding that we experienced recently. So the expectation is that currently the economy might grow at a lower rate, but it might not go beyond the 4%. Next, we look at inflation and nominal interest rate, and the analysis covered a period of around 1 year from January 2023 all the way to January this year. And as you can see, in the first part of 2023, we saw that inflation rates were very high. Depicted by the green background, you can see in January 2023, the rates were at around 8.98%. It went up to 9% in Feb. For the first part, let's say up to July, inflation rates were above the government range. That is, they predict that inflation should be between 2.5 and 7%. So here we can see it was above the 7%, the upper bound. So from around March of 2023, the Monetary Policy Committee of Central Bank tried to increase the CBR, that is to curb the rising inflation rate. And they increased from a rate of 8.75% to 9.5%. That is in March 2023. In June, again, they increased the rate to 10.5%. And in December of 2023 and January, it went up again to 12.5%. And this is a monetary tightening policy that is meant to reduce the rising change in consumer prices. As you all know, inflation is contributed by three, we look at the three categories, that is the food prices, the fuel prices, and there's another category of the core inflation part, which is basically what the non-food and non-fuel prices. The reason why the inflation was very high in the first part of 2023 is because of the geopolitical tensions that we know were happening. That is the Russia-Ukraine war. Because as we know, Kenya imports a lot of fuel and food commodities from outside. And for example, we used to import grain from Ukraine, and therefore this was affected, meaning we had shortage of this product, and therefore they pushed up the inflation. As well as on fuel, you remember the administration removed the fuel levy plus the depreciation of Kenya shilling, and therefore this further pushed up the fuel inflation. Fuel prices, sorry, and this made the inflation rate to go up. The third rate that we looked at was the rate of 91 T-bill, and this has been going up, and it's pushed by the government's need to borrow domestically, of which the adverse effect of this is the crowding out of private investors. However, this might help in reducing the rate of inflation, but on the other hand, it's affecting the domestic economy by reducing the credit available to investors domestically. Next, we looked at the average nominal foreign exchange rate of Kenya shilling against a few selected currencies, and these are nominal rates we've not adjusted for inflation. And we looked at this was done for a period of around 11 years as well. And as you can see, the shilling depreciated against most of them, actually all of them. Like for euro in 2013, it was exchanging at 114.41. But in 2023, it went up to 151.25. The USD in 2013 was exchanging at 86.12, but in 2023, it went up all the way to 139. The pound as well went up from around 134, all the way to 174. For Tanzania and Uganda shilling, it's a reverse. So the shilling was exchanging higher at a higher rate. I mean, we needed more Tanzanian exchange rate in comparison to Kenya shilling. But here we see that the Tanzanian shilling appreciated against the Kenya shilling as well as the Uganda shilling. And therefore, we can conclude that our currency is very volatile because it keeps on changing. Next, you look at the employment, and similarly, this was done for a period of around 11 years, from 2013 to 2023. And the first observation here is that the informal sector creates more jobs compared to the formal sector. And this gives you an idea of the structure of our economy. It means that formal sector employs less than the informal sector. And we know that the informal sector is the hardest to tax sector, and it employs the low skilled, and it also pays less. So in form of getting revenue from this sector is a bit difficult. Another observation is the loss of jobs in 2020. We know what happened in 2020, the effects of COVID-19. And we can say that the informal sector employs over, not even double, it employs a lot of people. But we can't get enough revenues from that sector. And finally, we looked at debt. First, we did a comparison with debt as a share of GDP, and for this analysis started from 2012, and you can see in 2012 the share of debt as a percentage of GDP was around 42.9%, and it went up all the way to 70 for a period of around 10 years. When increased from 42.9% to 71.4%. In terms of the composition of this debt, we've seen that initially we used to have more external debt than the domestic one. For instance, you can see around 2012 and 2013, we had more domestic than external. And then towards the middle of this period, they moved now outside and borrowed more from outside. And then towards the end, from around 2021, we moved back to domestic borrowing. And domestic borrowing is pushed by the need of course, for short-term credit. And you think the rates are very high, like the 91 T-bill rates of return is around 16%. And this is encouraging, the government is trying to encourage domestic borrowing, of which we've seen they are going to crowd out private investment. Finally, we looked at debt servicing, and this was done as a percentage of revenue. this basically tells us how much debt eats our revenues. And this data was from the statistical reports of National Treasury. And in 2013, we used to pay around 10.7% from our revenues we used around 10.7% to pay our debts. But in 2021, the rate went up. So we can say around 30% of our revenues are used to pay debt. And if you look at I've not included that, but the most recent reports indicate that around 50% of our revenues go in paying debt. And this is basically, we are just paying interest, as you can see, domestic interest, because we are borrowing domestically at very high interest rate. As you can see from in 2019, 2020, 2021, the domestic interest rate is very high, and followed by the external interest and then the principal amount. And that is the end of my presentation. Thank you. And invite my colleague Raphael to take you through the next phase of this presentation.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Raphael Munya, and I will be sharing with you this section on the budget outstanding. Basically, just highlighting the numbers that we shared yesterday and giving our thought in terms of those numbers. So thank you. Faith has shared with us the macroeconomic environment, meaning the health of our economy. Is it generating the revenues as it should be, so that we are able to finance our expenditure? And the discussion has been about these numbers in terms of looking at the revenue side, but also looking at the expenditure side. And if you look critically at this table, what you see is that looking at the revenue side, you see that for the year 2023-2024, we had projected to correct revenues to a tune of 3 trillion shillings. And then this year, we project to correct revenues to a tune of 3.2 trillion shillings. And therefore, in terms of growth of overall revenue correction, it's projected to grow at a rate of 4.6%. But if you go deeper into the details, looking at both the ordinary revenue and appropriation rates and the grants that we receive from our partners, there is an element of ordinary revenue that we need to question in terms of how we project our revenues and really actually actualize the revenue correction. For example, for the year 2023-2024, we had projected correct revenues to around 2.5 trillion shillings. But if you look at the end of the actual correction up to 31st December 2020, toward the end of last year, in the month of December, the total correction for the actual correction was actually 1.4 trillion shillings. And therefore, it represented a deficit of around 1 point something. In a Harvard quote, you question as to whether, and if you look in terms of the actual correction up to the month of March, this year, the actual correction, we had a deficit of around 600p. The question is, will you be able to actualize the projection or the target that you had projected? Our thinking is that you have a deficit of around 13%, and therefore, in terms of the change of not actualizing the targeted revenue, it's around 18%. But overall, based on the figures that we have shared, which are put an asterisk, it shows that the government, we are along in terms of how we model our revenue corrections. In terms of expenditures, two things we need to mention. That there is two things. One is the total discretionary expenditure, and there is the non-discretionary expenditure. Meaning non-discretionary expenditure, that's a first charge. You don't have a choice, you have to pay. But non-discretionary expenditure constitutes the executive expenditure. You have parliament and judiciary, and of course, we have contingency, emergencies, and equalization funds, which are supposed to, equalization fund, they are supposed to specifically to those marginalized counties. And in terms of expenditure, the executive part of it, the total discretionary expenditure is projected to be at around 2.3%. And equalization fund, I have put an asterisk. If you look at the division of revenue bill, the projections was around 11.4%, 11.4 billion shillings. But yesterday's speech by the cabinet secretary, he mentioned around 8B. That's why we had to put an asterisk, because we rely with the most recent documents that we have. That document was uploaded in the morning, and perhaps that's the reason why I put an asterisk. We'll do some adjustments. And then Parliament is 44 billion shillings, correct? Parliament is 44.6 billion shillings. And then we have contingency of 5 billion shillings. And 5 billion, the provision by Parliament every year, I think the emergency fund should be always 5 billion shillings. I don't know the reason why. We need to interrogate the reason why last year it was pegged at 1.2 billion shillings. Judiciary, Jackie will be talking about more about it. Yes, the last year it was 18.9 billion shillings. The approved one by the budget committee is 24.6 billion shillings. County allocation, we need to have a discussion about it. Last year, the shareable revenue was around 385 billion. If you add the conditional grants, it came to around 423 billion shillings. This year, the figure I'm sharing is 410 billion shillings, because the division of revenue bill provided that the conditional grants will be around 10.6 billion shillings. And the report from the budget committee provided around 400 billion shillings. That totals to around 4.10 billion shillings. But what I'm sharing, but yesterday in the reading, I think the conditional grants came, the figure that came out was around 54.7 billion shillings. And then the share for conditional grants. And then for share of revenue, it's around 400 B. So that will be around 455.5 billion shillings transfer to the county. So definitely these figures we have to, based on the actual numbers that has been uploaded in the website, there will be a slight change, but not much. In terms of non-discretionary expenditure, we have a total of 2.056. I know Treasury is the cabinet secretary provided a figure of 1.2 trillion shillings, because he did not include the redemptions, because redemptions, they do not affect the overall size of the budget. And therefore, what we are providing here is that we are providing an overall fiscal deficit of around 1.630. This is the overall fiscal deficit. But if you want to get the primary deficit, what you do is that you less the interest of around 1 trillion shillings. And if you less that, you remain with a primary deficit of around 620. Treasury is providing 597. So the difference is around 20 billion shillings, which we can, and those figures, I think they will be able to balance out. So that's the outcome in terms of numbers. Now, what about where are we getting our money from? I think we need to decompose this so that it's clear in terms of where we are getting. And if you want to get these numbers, you get them from the estimates of revenue and grants. These figures, they are clearly provided there, and they are shared, I think, a month ago. And in terms of income tax, I think we will be able to get an average of around 1.2 trillion shillings. VAT, 812 billion shillings, 434 billion shillings, other taxes, other revenues. And this is the contention. If you look at the estimates of revenue and grants, it provides 57.2 billion shillings. What was read yesterday by the cabinet secretary is around 65 billion shillings. And therefore, the differences between what you see here and what is provided in the estimate Appropriation in aids, they provide a figure of 472. They provide a figure of 441 because the figure for its only appropriation in aid for recurrent, but for development component of around 35 billion shillings, it is not incorporated, and it is in the estimates of revenue. Grants, that one we tie, it's at 51.8, and in total, we have 32.245 trillion shillings that we expect to correct as a country. Two things I need to mention, because the question of finance bill will come in. What is provided for by finance bill is the question of additional resources. So we have tax measures, the tax measures that we are read by the cabinet secretary. Those are additional revenues so that we are able to finance our budget fully. In terms of decomposition of our budget, I think this is how, in terms of percentages, the entire budget look like. Now, we have a budget, we project a budget of 4.8 trillion shillings, inclusive. These are not include redemptions. Therefore, in terms of consolidated fund services, the entire budget is around 42%. And then in terms of the executive, it's around 42%. Parliament will get around 6.0, and I gave the figure 0.9% of the entire spending. Judiciary 0.51. We have county allocation, and I say it's coming to around 455 billion shillings, coming to around 8.42%. Contingency fund, which is provided at 8 billion shillings, 5 billion shillings is around 0.1% for emergencies. And then we have the equalization fund, which goes to the marginalized counties at around 0.25%. Now, in terms of the composition of these numbers as a share of GDP, if you move from the year 2022 to 2024, for the year 2022-2024, we are around 26%, 22, 23, 30%, and then this year we have 29%. If we are able to take this budget and then you spread it per person in this country, what does it mean? For this year, I think in terms of making sure that each and population, taking a population of around 55.5 million people in this country, each person is supposed to get around 94,000 Kenya shillings. So the government, if it share this out budget, can share a tune of 94,000 shillings per year. And in terms of, if you adjust this for inflation, if you adjust this figure for inflation, this year, the amount of money, the amount of spending that the government is supposed to provide is an equivalent of 82,000 shillings. What does it mean? On a monthly basis, the government is supposed to provide services equivalent to around 6,800 shillings. On a daily basis, it means that the government is supposed to provide services equivalent to around 230 shillings. So these numbers, they are supposed to explain in terms of what services government is supposed to provide to each and every Kenyans in this country. Number two, I think it is important to understand the decomposition of our expenditure in terms of recurrent and development. And in terms of recurrent, for last year, the executive arm of government, in terms of allocation, received 100.6 trillion shillings. Development component, which forms a very important component in terms of infrastructure. And we know the component of development of expenditure is supported mostly by the development partners. So it was around 458 billion shillings. If you compare in terms of the executive budget, that is all the MDAs, ministries, departments, and agencies, there has been a very small reduction from 1.66 to around 1.63. There have been some realignment, some minor adjustments. In terms of development component, I think there has been a jump from 458 billion shillings to around almost double. And these are some of the issues that we need to interrogate in terms of why the jump. What are some of the components that have been included in the MDAs to explain the jump in the expenditure? Now, Let's look at the share of expenditure and revenue to our figures. Now, the trends that we have from the year 2021 up to the year 2024, I think in terms of expenditure, I think our expenditure has been rising all the way. And also in terms of revenue, the revenues are not behind. The revenues are still rising. And then at the same time, if you look in terms of deficit, our physical deficit has also been rising. And what it means, it means that then in terms of our deficit rising, it means that it's like we have a structural problem with our deficit. In that the money that we borrow, to finance our budget, basically should be development component to ensure that whatever investments that we are making as a country is able to generate revenue so that we are able to compensate for what we are borrowing. It means that we have it's supposed to generate revenue equivalent to what we have in terms of deficit, meaning we have a structural problem in terms of generating our own revenue. In terms of GDP, again, our proportion of deficit as a percentage of GDP has been growing from 8% to 10%. But then for the year 2023, it was around 11%, and then it jumps down to around 10%. Percentage share of our mandatory expenditure and non-discretionary expenditure. The question that was there was as to whether this has been a reduction. But if you check in terms of total discretionary expenditure, that one again, it shows that it has increased from 56% to 58%. And in terms of discretionary expenditure, for the year 2023-2024 compared to 2024-2025, it's from 44%, the entire component, from 44% to 42%. Now let's go to the CFS, the Consolidated Fund Services. And remember, when you're talking about the Consolidated Fund Services, whenever we have, there is always and it is constituted by the Consolidated Fund Services. Consolidated Fund Services constitutes the public debt. We have the pensions, we have the salaries and allowances, we have miscellaneous services and subscription to our international organizations. And of course, there is some guaranteed debt. When you look through those numbers, what it tells you that if you look at the CFS, 90% of our CFS, the public debt constitutes the highest proportion, followed by pension and followed by salaries and our allowances. But what picture do we pick from here in terms of from the year 2015 up to the year 2023? The picture that is depicted here, it shows that our CFS in terms of our GOK expenditure has been rising from 17% up to 45% in the year 2024. And what it tells us about our flexibility in terms of how our spending is that the proportion of our discretionary spending is reducing because our CFS figure is actually rising, and therefore we need to come up with perhaps what the CS was better measures or better austerity measures to ensure that we are able to reduce our expenditure in terms of to ensure that we are able to reduce our physical deficit. Again, in terms of comparing our deficit in terms of GDP, gross domestic CFS in terms of gross domestic product, it tells us that from the year 2015 up to the year 2024, I think it has been growing from 5% to 12%, meaning that in the year 2015, our CFS, Consolidated Fund Services, constituted 5% of our GDP. If the GDP was around, in the year 2015, it was around 122, 5% of that, it constituted our CFS. If we are able to generate those revenues, it will go to the repayment of our CFS. In the year 2024, we are saying that 12% of our GDP constitutes CFS. Those are figures that we need to compare. Now, the other aspect that is very interesting, and the CS was very critical in terms of making sure that our pending bills by the MDAs and the state corporations, they are paid on time, and as it is provided by the PFM Act, that all the pending bills, whether it is counties or even the national MDAs and state corporation, they're supposed to be a fast charge. Fast charge, meaning that come July 1st, we are not supposed to be having pending bills from the MDAs. That is provided for. And I think the CS was very clear in terms of having to place a verification committee for the pending bills. And they are supposed, the statement was that a clear message in terms of how they have audited all the pending bills will be shared by the end of October. But what we are saying is this, that the pending bills for the national government has been rising. If you compare, has been rising over the years. Although if you look in terms of what is provided for that year, the June 2023, and you compare with what is provided in the year 31st March 2024, there have been some little improvement. Even in the counties, there have been some little improvement. But we need, why am I saying this? Public pending bills, to some extent, contribute to the issue of public debt. And our accounting officers should make sure that we are paying our suppliers and our contractors on time, because failure to do that, it affects the overall liquidity of our funds. The moment the government hold payments toward the creditors, those suppliers of the various issues that the ministry, if it's furniture, if it's water, if it all those items, then it affects the liquidity of other firms. And therefore, we are saying that it is important for the accounting officer or the MDAs to be paying the creditors on time, so that we can be able to improve the liquidity of this country and, of course, improve the health of the economy. Number two is that if you look in terms of ministries, department, agencies, in terms of pending bills, most pending bills actually are in the state corporations. And specifically, look at the state corporations, it is on projects related to contractors on the development side. And therefore, it means that we need to be checking on those particular items, or to verify whether the genuineness of some of the contracts. And we know, even at the county level, what happens in terms of contracts. And I'll leave that one as that. Then we go to sector analysis, and we just give some few highlights. Now, in terms of the executive budget, in terms of spending, we normally have 9 sectors. That is starting from the agricultural rural and development, all the way to social protection. I need to mention something here. When I mention a sector, for example, agricultural, rural, and urban development, we have quite a number of state departments inside. We have the State Department for Crop Development. We have the State Department for Physical Planning, all of them, like 5. And they have an allocation for all that. But the picture we are painting here, we want to show which sector received the highest amount. And the sector that received the highest amount is the Ministry of Education, followed closely by the energy sector, and then we have the public administration and international relations. And then the sector that received the lowest amount in terms of allocation by the National Treasury is actually the social protection sector. And we know It's actually GETA, and that is General Economic and Commercial Affairs, and the social protection sector. And we know what constitutes the social protection. This is where we have allocation toward the vulnerable groups, and we need to find out where there's some reductions. In terms of real numbers, these are the numbers in terms of the allocation. Agricultural, in terms of the highest sector that received the highest amount is the education sector. It received around 658 billion shillings. That's around 48%, followed closely by the energy infrastructure and ICT at 10%. And then we have that is in terms of sectors allocation. Then we have public administration and international relation. But if you want to compute in terms of the overall share, I think the consolidated fund services at 42%, as I mentioned, is the one which is having the largest composition. And I mentioned that what it tells you is that it affects the flexibility of the budget, of how the spending to the other ministries should be. If we decompose this further in terms of recurrent and development expenditure, what you realize is that the national security, GJ laws, that is governance, justice, law and order, and then the education sector actually constitute the largest proportion in terms of the recurrent expenditure. And we know the reason why. For the education sector, it's about human capital. And therefore, the proportion of it largely will be on recurrent expenditure. If you go to the recurrent, the development side, the sectors which have the highest proportion is actually the environment protection at 70%. And then we have the energy sector and the agricultural sector. And in terms of looking at the sectors, these figures I have not included here, which received in terms of reduction in allocation, one of the sectors is the education sector. I think the reduction was from the figure of 658 to 644. Then we have ministry, we have agriculture, a small proportion, and then we have GECA. Those are the three sectors that received reduction in terms of allocation. What are some of the conclusions we drew from those numbers? I think I mentioned one. One of it is that in terms of our fiscal deficit, I think we do have a structural problem in terms of we normally have each and every year our fiscal deficit has been rising, and our borrowing should be, it is not supposed to be meant for salary. It's supposed to be for development. It's supposed to be for infrastructure, and therefore the assumption is that what the investment that we are getting out of this borrowing are supposed to generate income that will be able to facilitate the payment of our fiscal deficit, and therefore our fiscal deficit should always be moving, not increase, should be moving towards zero. But here we are, our fiscal deficit has been rising, and therefore we are saying that we do have we need to address that. And then number two is that each and every year we normally have unrealistic revenue forecast. I mentioned that this 20 by the month we had not reached our revenue target. We had some deficits, and what it means is that by the end of June this month, most likely we will not be able to hit those targets, and therefore most of the programs that we are planned to be implemented, they will not be implemented, and therefore we'll be again talking about those unrealized revenue, and therefore we need to come up with a proper model where we stick to our revenue projections and we say this is the amount of revenue we can be able to generate as a country. Let's plan on this. And therefore, we will not be having even the issue of what civil society mentioned about budgeted corruption and all that. And then the issue of high domestic borrowing. I think Faith mentioned about it. The moment we have more of our domestic borrowing, what will happen is that because of high interest rate that are charged to the loans by the government, by the institution that relate to the government, then it means that most of it will be crowding out our investors. And then I mentioned about the pressure that the fiscal consolidation pressure, and what we are saying is that some of the adjustments, for example, and we need to mention this. For example, we have been talking about there are some sectors which have received some reductions, but there are some others which have received an increase in allocation. And what we are saying is that some of these adjustments are borne by sectors which social protection and others. And yesterday the CS was very clear in terms of what they need to do to ensure that we have our fiscal consolidation is working. And he mentioned about reduction, the employment of public service will be suspended in the next 1 year. The issue of no purchase of furnitures, and already it is budgeted for certain state departments. So we are saying that there is that pressure. How we balance it, I think we have work to do. So thank you very much. I think those are some of the highlights that I needed to share. Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jacqueline Kabumen, and I'll be making this last part of the presentation. As was mentioned earlier, we did the budget analysis in 3 parts. At the beginning, we intended to present an overall outlook, the macro outlook. Then we've had the main budget analysis, particularly focusing on expenditure, the overall expenditure by the national government. And lastly, this last part is supposed to present a few highlights for the judiciary, parliament, and chapter 15 commissions. So from what Raphael has presented, as well as Faith, I think we have a picture of the general picture. But the reason why we decided to separate and provide an analysis for these institutions is because, first of all, the Constitution has placed very specific obligation on some of these, the key institutions that we'll be looking at, both for oversight of that budget, to ensure transparency and accountability, to ensure the promotion of democracy. I mean, in addition to the system of checks and balances, the Constitution has determined that we must have certain institutions that will be an additional check. That's why we have chapter 15 commissions. So we needed to see, are they funded adequately? What is their resource level like in the current budget, and also to place that in context slightly. And then, so that's what my presentation will be about. I'll only take about 15 minutes. To begin with the judiciary, again, I mean, we've looked at this for those of you who've attended budget sessions annually. We've looked at the allocations to the judiciary annually for the results as stated. So this is how their allocation for 2024-25 looks like. Column, we for 2024-25, and this is for the judiciary alone. It's been allocated 23.74 billion. That's excluding the allocation to the Judicial Service Commission. If you add the 902 million that is allocated to the Judicial Service Commission, is what brings it to the 24.6 billion that Raphael showed you in a chart with the overall outlay. So this represents a 7% increase from the financial year 2023-24. And for 2022-23, it was about 20.97 billion. I should have added the financial year there. So that is the allocation to the judiciary. And to place it in context slightly, so you know that under Article 173.3, the judiciary is required to present estimates or an outlook of its expenditure to Parliament separately, and not to the National Treasury, to Parliament for consideration. So they have been doing that annually, and in terms of the documents that we're able to, what their resource requirement is, and we've also been looking at this annually versus the allocation. They presented a resource requirement for 44.9 billion. As we've seen, the estimates for this year is the allocation for this year, excluding the JSC, is 23.74 billion, which also translates to a resource gap of about 21.16 billion. It's significant. You know, they always have the arguments as that most of these institutions claim state a claim for higher resources than they might. For higher resources, but for us, we've been keen as the PLE program of the year, we've been keen to check for what is the adequate resourcing level of an institution like the judiciary based on, if you look at the consumer mandates, if you try and cost the functions, what would be an adequate resource level? And we did a study last year, which is available if you'd like to check that. And our calculations came to very close to what they actually have been claiming, as it came to around 40 in the Kenyan context. If you look at the service delivery requirements, the HR requirements, the infrastructure requirements, our calculations came to about 40 billion, which is not too far from what they requested, but I think you can see, so there's a significant resource gap there, which obviously then has implications in terms of service delivery, in terms of delays in processing cases, delays in expanding the court infrastructure. I think we had yesterday, the CS mentioned something about them intending to facilitate the modernization of the judiciary's infrastructure. But I think we wait to see to what extent that modernization can be done. If you're providing from all the resources that they require, you provide only almost just about half of what they need. So they had a number of strategic plans that aim to modernize the institution of the judiciary. And so even in terms of their own strategic objectives and service delivery, I think they are a bit hampered and or constrained by the limited resources. And we'll see this when we look at the other institutions as well, and then of course compare this to Parliament. So I'll go to Parliament and talk about the judiciary. So for Parliament, this is the allocation for this 2024-25 financial year. It's a total of 44.5 billion. The specific post heads or programs are listed there. I think you can see that the bulk or the highest share goes to the National Assembly, National Legislation, Representation and Oversight. The first three roles represent allocations to the Senate. Then we have Parliament has a number of shared services, which is in the next two. You can see the Parliamentary Service Commission General Administration, the HR Management, and then you can see all the ones that are listed as joint services. So I think the National Assembly, obviously with the allocation of 26.775 billion, takes the largest share under the overall allocation to the legislature. And that it is obviously, as you can see, it's also higher than the allocation even to the judiciary, the one to the National Assembly by itself. And trying to also place this in context, yesterday, we were just from our calculations, and you can tell that Parliament's allocation implies an expenditure of close to $1 billion daily, maybe around 900, slightly under 900 million. So just trying to understand those numbers. Then we set up this chart just to show you um, uh, just some brief trends. So for Parliament, in terms of looking at the growth of their budget, so they've had an increase from the last year, from the previous financial year, where they had an allocation of 40.4 billion, and in this current year, they think it's going to be 44 billion. Then they had a decrease in 2022-23, but it's because at the time that the completion of the main infrastructure projects, their offices. But then in terms of the actual allocation of movement from 23-24 to 24-25, it's this 44 billion that has now moved or increased to, that has now increased to 44 billion, yes, to the 44 billion. So those are the budgets of the two institutions, Parliament and the Judiciary. We lastly look at the allocation to the constitutional commissions, all the institutions created and as constitutional commissions and key independent offices. Again, I will re-emphasize that these institutions play a very critical role in terms of safeguarding the Constitution, ensuring adherence to minimum constitutional principles by the public or the public sector. And so to ensure, because they are stated as independent, to ensure the operational independence, operational autonomy, as well as actual to ensure the actual autonomy of these institutions, they need to be adequately resourced to also avoid influence, external influence, or basically to avoid that influence or to avoid their decisions being interfered by resources promised from other sources. So it's without crucial for us to check what allocation has gone to these institutions. So the ones in green are actually the ones that have had a very slight increase in their budgets, but and they should also have added the IPOA there because it's also had an increase. But if you look at all the others, they've had a reduction in their budgets, and we are very aware that there have been talks of the fiscal consolidation and the parent budget cuts for most institutions. It had been said that there will be, but from our analysis, and I think it will come in my summary, I think we see that this reduction has been heavily borne by the institutions that are created as independent offices. So say for those four institutions, the three in green and adding a four, the others have had reductions in their budgets. I think you can see from this, the SRC, for instance, previously had an allocation of 550 million that has reduced by 14% to 472 million. We have the Commission on Administrative Justice has had an 11% reduction in their budget. The JSC, it has had a 4% reduction. I think you can see the numbers there. We will go through each of them, but save for the ones in green, all the others have had a reduction in their budgets. Lastly, we look at the Office of the Auditor General, and just pay particular attention to it. Again, given the crucial role that it has, or mandates that it has been assigned by the Constitution. The OAG under Article 259 has been assigned the sole responsibility of checking and confirming that resources are spent lawfully, all public resources are spent lawfully and effectively. They are the institution that have been tasked with overseeing and ensuring that the 4.3 trillion budget is spent lawfully and effectively. And we would hope or imagine that given that very significant mandate, they would have the adequate resources to be able to check and confirm the application of resources is lawful. So so for them, we also considered the resource requirement versus the allocation. I know in the previous chart, we see there has been a small marginal increase in their budget of about 300 million, but that is insignificant in terms of given their role and given the resource requirements, the resourcing level that they have stated as being adequate for them to be able, particularly to carry out specialized audits. We had a look at their documents as well and saw their rationale or justification for why they needed the additional resources at about 11 billion. They've been intending to expand their infrastructure. They've been intending to carry out a number of special audits in terms of procurement audits in particular. And they've also been intending to at least set up an office in every county from our last, from checking their resources and also from our discussions with the office. So these resources were supposed to facilitate that process. So as you can see, they have a resource gap of 2.3 billion and have been allocated 8.67 billion in this current year. So then you can interpret what that means in terms of their ability to their operational efficiency and effectiveness in discharging their mandates. We look at in terms of the budget absorption, and we looked at this to just justify and confirm whether they indeed it had been allocated and if the resources they request, if it is justifiable, and we can see that they have a very high absorption rate, consistently over 90%, almost at 100. One of the few institutions that have very high budgetary absorption rates, despite challenges in extra releases, despite all the other challenges that other institutions use to claim why they have low absorption rates. I think you can see for the OAG has been relative. So in conclusion, I think I've already stated this in passing, but from our analysis of the budgets of these institutions, it's clear that through we've had quite a bit of fiscal pressures, but despite the fiscal pressure that we have seen or that have been faced by the Treasury, by the executive, I think we see that the adjustments to the budgets have been borne disproportionately by some of these smaller institutions that have a lower bargaining power when it comes to discussions on resource allocation. So the institutions that are tasked with those constitutional obligations seem to be inadequately resourced and seem to bear the burden of the cuts to align to the supposed fiscal consolidation. Then is that it adverse consequences for the independence of these offices, the judiciary, and for the others. Parliament, not so much. Parliament has had an increase in their budgeting where they play the primary role in determining those allocations. So Parliament, not so much, but for the judiciary and the Chapter 15 institutions, there are severe consequences for the independence and operational effectiveness of those institutions. So in terms of slowed down access to justice, delayed access to justice, in terms of, I think I've already overstated the rationale. Then for the Office of the Auditor General, the implication there is for the task of overseeing the lawful and effective implementation of that 4 trillion budget. The minimum that that Parliament could do is to assign adequate resources to this office. The their primary client, the primary clients of the Office of the Auditor General is Parliament. They are the primary or first recipients of those audit reports, and they actually help Parliament to play their role more effectively. So by Parliament denying the resources required, I think it's counterproductive to their own performance. I don't know that Parliament sees that, but it hampers their ability to actually also for Parliament to also discharge their responsibility more effectively. Then it will be as a whole for all of them, again, the constraints, the allocation that we have seen for these institutions implies certain constraints to rights provision and service delivery. Remember, again, under the Constitution, they have been tasked primarily to facilitate or ensure the enjoyment of the rights that are articulated in the Constitution under Chapter 4 and various other rights arising from different constitutional dictates. So the inadequate resources imply constraints on rights provision and service delivery by constitutional commissions and independent offices. And then so there's need to strengthen the mechanisms for public oversight to ensure efficient use of allocated funds. So what we are saying is that from our assessment, given the crucial role that this institution in ensuring playing that oversight, the crucial role that these institutions have in ensuring oversight of public resources, it is imperative that proper mechanisms should be put in place to ensure that the resources are allocated efficiently, and then they be able to discharge of that role of ensuring the efficient use of the allocated funds. Then lastly, I think from our analysis and from our assessments, we are not clear that Parliament has a rational way of allocating resources or what model they rely on, particularly when it comes to allocation of resources to some of these institutions. So for instance, from our own assessment, we undertook a study to cost the mandate, cost the functions of the judiciary, cost the mandate, comparatively looking at other jurisdictions, what is adequate or what should be the key considerations for assigning resources. Now, given the trend that we have seen from our own numbers, it has not been very clear that Parliament relies on any appropriate model. And so our suggestion would be, or our proposal here is that Parliament should consider adopting a model, either invest first of all some good research to inform the allocation or to inform a proper model for adequate allocations to different institutions. So they do not seem to have a problem assigning themselves additional resources every year or so. But for these other independent institutions, not so much. So there should be something that is relied on or that informs, there should be a model that is relied on or that informs the determination of resources that should go to these offices.
Right, thank you. Thanks, Jacqueline. Thanks, so ladies and gentlemen, what we've done this morning is to make a three-part presentation. The first presentation was on just basically what's the macroeconomic context for this budgeting season. And I believe considered rates. No, I'll just speak from here, so I can't stay too close to the air conditioner because it may be off. So my colleagues have just made three-part conversation. It's for purpose to cooperate fully. You'll handle the questions with them. Just let me finish this, please. So three-part conversation. The first part was on the macroeconomics, which is to provide the background to the budget season. In the second part, my colleagues provided the budget outline, which is how the budget numbers fit together with where the allocations would go to each. And the third part was basically what the specific allocations are to independent offices and constitutional bodies. Now, we come to the point where I'll ask you to, if you have any questions, we'll send the microphone around and the questions will be handled by anyone of them. So you let me know whether you have a comment or a question, and any of my colleagues and each of those three heads will give you the answers. Let me ask somebody, so who start? Can we have somebody start here in the mic? Oscar, Shan, please start. Where we start? Who has a question? Anyone with a question or comment? Anyone? Oh, yes, there's a question right at the back.
Thanks for that wonderful presentation, man. I think my colleagues and I, the first question would be, what is the place of? Oh, sorry. My name is Helix Ogushunju. I work at Pamoja FM, the process speaker. So perhaps the first question would be, what is the place of the new tax measures by the KK government in addressing all these concerns that you have raised in the presentation? I mean, do you think as experts, we are headed to the right direction? Considering that the other day, IMF also warned President Ruto that what you're doing is going to harm your economy. Thanks.
Okay, fine.
Okay, thank you. My name is Eric Okwayo from Kesa. So my question was with regards to suspending recruitment of suspending new recruits in the new financial year as an austere measure to manage or rather sustain our expenditure. So do you think that is the right measure or austere measure to sustain our expenditure? And then when we talk of suspending this recruitment, which population are we targeting? Are we targeting entry levels or rather any other people? Thank you.
Fine, I'm circulating the conversation right now. So was there another hand? No. Okay, my colleagues, we start from Basit, so we can start with you, Jackie, and then we come to Rafa, and then pick any of the questions and then give the answers. As it is, we probably be required to start with you.
So, Henry's question was what's the place of the new tax measures in addressing the concerns that have been raised. I don't know that I understand that question very clearly. I think I don't know if you mean whether the new tax will be effective in reaching or addressing the fiscal pressure that we currently are facing. If that's my interpretation of your question, that you can clarify and my colleagues will also respond. But I think that's your question. Okay, good. So if that's your question, then I think not necessarily, actually not at all in my opinion. So I think from what Raphael demonstrated to us in terms of tax revenue performance, the trends have been that consistently the Kenya Revenue, the Revenue Authority has fallen short in terms of the collections. So they have overestimated the possible collections consistently. And what that has, despite every year, despite the addition of new tax heads or increments in tax rates on various tax heads every year, we still see the revenue shortfalls. So what this means is, so for instance, last year when they had an increase, they introduced the housing levy or housing tax, they in their calculations had intended or had hoped to achieve a certain collection or amount, but despite that, they still fell short from the revenue targets. So what this means is that I think the mistake that Parliament makes is that they do not consider the market reaction to various adjustments. They do not consider that the market behaves or readjust in certain ways, for even for instance when it comes to VAT and different products and adding making providing taxes on certain commodities, then the market behaves by substituting patents for those commodities. And so somehow we basically end up not achieving the requisite targets. So I think the non-consideration of the market behavior, non-consideration of the likely implications of those adjustments, I think is what results to those gaps. And so even with the additional tax measures, I still think, in my view, that they are likely to fall short because the trends, if the trends are anything to go by, I think they are likely to fall short. I know there have been a number of contentious tax proposals from the motor vehicle tax all the way to some of those VAT additions, the additions of the equally some of, I mean, I think for most of those most of those additions, we are not likely to address the problem through overtaxing. Even the stated claim that they want the tax revenue to increase the tax revenue as a percentage of the GDP from to almost about 20%. From our calculations, it's not likely that. I think the overtaxing will be counterproductive to what they are trying to achieve, and it's not likely that they will even address the fiscal pressure. Then the other question that has been asked is on suspending new recruits by Eric. Suspending new recruits as part of the austerity measures. Again, I also don't know that. I think so. You've asked whether this measure is useful for the fiscal consolidation plans that they spoke about, and I think first, of course, I need to look at the data properly in terms of the remuneration level or what allocation has been going there in the past. But again, from the top of my head, I would imagine that it would be still insignificant because it seems to us that the majority of these cuts are done in areas that are actually insignificant to yield any actual major savings. I mean, I think we saw from the numbers that sometimes they target institutions with very small. Parliament has been targeting institutions with very small budgets and making cuts from there, which of course then yields insignificant consequences in terms of what savings have been made from it. So if I would think about the allowances that go to new recruits on the expenditure, and then place that vis-a-vis other expenditure, for instance, the travel, the contentious travel, the contentious allocations to allowances and multiple allowances that are due to different public officers. I think they should have started instead from rationalizing allowances that are due to public officials, because that's where we see the largest, from the Auditor General's reports, that's where we see the largest fiscal slippage. So instead of targeting smaller inconsequential allocations, I would say that they should have do a better rationalization or harmonization of wages.
Yeah. I think Jackie has been the concern that have been raised. But maybe a word on for Felix. As I said yesterday, and you ask a very good question. Are we, in terms of taxation, are we headed in the right direction? I would say this: if you look in terms of the measures that has been put in place to ensure that we have additional revenue, how did we achieve this? And one of the things that we had mentioned during the preparation of the medium-term revenue strategy is that the review of this tax code, each and a better environment for investors to come in and do their investments, and thereby making sure that we are able to grow our economy, and thereafter our economy will be able to generate more revenue so that we can cater for that. Not all taxation proposals are bad. As are contained, there are those ones which are they are focused on ensuring that we can grow as an economy. But there are those, and I've not mentioned them because Jackie has mentioned something to do. There have been an issue of housing levy, motor vehicle, and even in terms of bread, instead of currently it was zero rated, now it is exemption. People think exemption is a good thing, but you are not able to claim input tax, which you use to prepare that particular product, and therefore that cost end up being passed to the consumer. So for me, what I would say is that in terms of the measures that we are coming up, we need a review and state that let's have a review of our tax system and say, let's have a sunset cross and say, let's have, for example, 4 years, so that we create an environment which will be better for our investors. Number two is, and Jackie has nailed it again, in terms of suspension of public service. Obviously, in terms of employing, having new recruits, it's the young people. And normally we are told we are the future. But then the government, through its implementation of the policy, says there will be no recruitment this year. And even if you are looking in terms of making sure that you have a fiscal consolidation, in terms of salary scales for those entries in government, we know how much they are, and therefore we could be deceiving ourselves thinking that the statement or the issue that we are focusing in will help to consolidate or have gains in terms of making sure that we are having an expenditure cut. And therefore, it is not the right move. I think there are so many other areas we can focus on to ensure that we have a proper fiscal consolidation led by the big state departments, and we know which ones. So let's be honest with ourselves when we are having these discussions. Thanks.
Thank you. I think my colleagues have done a good job in trying to answer these questions. Mine is just a small addition to the first question. Allow me to go back to the outturn table. So from this table, we can see that revenues are growing at the change or the approved for this the next year's budget. They are projecting to increase revenue collection by around 4.6%. And looking at the total expenditures, the government has increased, or they are projecting to increase spending by 7.3%. From what you can see from this picture, our issue is not on the revenue side. The reason why the government tries to raise taxes is to increase collection. And time again, over the years, we've seen that they review the finance bill every year to increase collection. And the adverse effect of increasing taxes is they create another problem of tax evasion. Sometimes they don't consider what the impact of increasing these taxes is, that most people will try to evade the high tax rates. So for me, what you should do as if I was to advise them, I would say we need to rationalize our spending. And the second question was about suspending new recruitment. And as Jackie has said, probably this might not be the best approach. We need to have rationalize the current wage bill because it's very high, and also try to cut on the recurrent expenditure because it's usually the highest proportion of spending. Thank you.
There's a question on the chat by Emily Kamau, and Emily asks that why is spending on water services not rather decreasing when water services generally generate revenue? And for most of water services and sanitation, the government spends 70% of regional development. So maybe one of my colleagues will come back to you there next. I'd like to just add a couple of points. I'd like to add a couple of points before. My colleagues have mentioned that that we have on the question about suspending new recruitments. So let's look at it in this way. I think in our view, well, some of my colleagues have said it a little different, but in our view at the Institute of Economic Affairs, the Cabinet Secretary made a very sensible argument for why suspension of recruitment in the public service. So the first is this: if you have a shock based on the kind of primary deficits that we showed, is you have a big deficit where the amount of money that needs to be brought in, or the amount of money that's collected, is insufficient to meet all the expenditure, and therefore government has to borrow a little bit more money. It already shows that something about the affordability of the public sector is a question. So that's one. The reasoning for the Cabinet Secretary says the laws require that the laws and convention require, and the SRC's advice is that public service should spend 35% of all income, of all revenues on paying public service workers. Kenya's numbers are closer to 41, fluctuated between 39 to 41. So it's already a barrier. So recruitment at a point where you're really violating the norms is a problem. So something needs to be done. And you can do that either by slashing wages, impossible in Kenya. People, that's also not politically possible. And so the decision that the Cabinet Secretary was advising is we are be forced to actually suspend for the time being the question of hiring more people. That is a sensible proposal, even if it means younger people are paying for the sins of the past by a bunch of the fact that people were already hired, they're already given wages, and therefore that has stuck in the budgets. So budgets are not run on a year-by-year basis, they run on a medium term. And that, in our view, is a sensible provision. So that's the first point. The second point is, if you look at the figures that my colleagues have presented here, looking at this, the ordinary revenue expected to be 2.7 trillion shillings, right? With additional income sources from appropriations in aid, which is the services for which government charges, together with some grants. We also noted that the Cabinet Secretary said that there's an expectation of about 60 billion shillings from the operations of private, the enterprises, the state-owned enterprises, we may bring in around 65 billion. If all that money is received, remember the debt burden that's supposed to be paid is about 1.9 trillion for the whole year. That is 1 trillion shillings in interest. As the figure showed, where was it? Let's go by the figures. Where was it from? Oh, yes. So if you can tell here, interest for 2024-25 is 1 trillion shillings for the whole year. And then the redemption of the debt, the payment of the principal is 843 billion. So 1.8 trillion shillings is only debt. Remember the revenues is 3 trillion, right? So what's left is 1.2 trillion, right? And then the 200 billion is for pensions for retired service, right? Which means of the 3 trillion the government hopes to collect in revenues, only 1 trillion is left, right? Now, the public wages is about 1.1 trillion, about 100 billion shillings per month. So it means that after paying debts and the pensions, the amount of money that is collected in taxes is not even enough to pay all public sector workers. You see where the dilemma is. And then here we are, citizens telling government you must hire more people. To pay them with what? So you understand what the Cabinet Secretary was saying. In the existing conditions, it is prudent, even if we Kenyans don't like it, to suspend recruitment until the structural problems in Kenya's budgets, balance sheet are resolved sufficiently to allow for people to be recruited and to be paid. Because you don't want people to recruit it and then they'll be on the streets again after 4 months because their salaries are not. So that, in our view, at the Institute of Economic Affairs, is sensible management of public finances, given the existing strictures that the Cabinet Secretary and the whole government has to pay for. Let me see whether there are other questions, and then we'll have a final round of questions together with the remaining questions. From any other question? Yes, please take the microphone.
Good morning. My name is Martin Muraga, member of IEA. The first question is on total debt as a percentage of GDP. Since 2022, the highest at 71%. It has gone down to 65% as projected for the 2024-2025 financial year. So does that mean that our debt has reduced in that period, or is it that our GDP has grown at a faster rate? My second question was the second item of the consolidated funds, the pensions. A while back, we switched to contributory model for the pensions. So do we expect this to go down in the near future?
Any other question? So, yes, right at the back. Okay.
Thank you.
Excuse me, sir. The guy with the mask. You go past.
I have removed it. Thank you. My name is Ayago, management consultant, and also a member of the institute. I just have one or two comments. One is on the wage bill. I think if, for example, we require teachers for JSS, you say we freeze, so what will happen? The students. So we must categorize what sectors are we stopping and what sectors are we reinforcing for purposes of employment. Two, I was looking at the total figures that the new tax proposals want to address, and it is maybe revenue of about 391 billion shillings. If you look at our economy, counterfeit leakage alone is over 400 billion. If we seal the counterfeit side, then we'll get enough money. Two, looking at the performance gap of the KRA in terms of how much we collect. And for me, the question we should be addressing and what the cabinet secretary should be telling us, it's measures that the government are taking to legislate on performance management of the accountability from including non-absorptions and the issues of pending bills, where the law is clear, it is fast catch, and we still have a pending bill of 660 billion, and there's no punishment that goes to that. My last comment is on the pension. I think as a country, we are poor in investing in our pension, because the idea of getting money to pay pension should not be from the exchange. It should be that the contributions are invested for the period you work, and when your time comes, then the benefits come. So we have people sleeping on their jobs in that area of pension discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Stephen Sibi from Economic Scholar Panel and Economic Students Association of Kenya. First of all, bringing the issue of debt service, we understand that recently there was a staff level agreement with the International Monetary Fund. So my question is there any hope for debt write-off for Kenya? Then the second issue, basically, I understand Peter Doyle has been addressing this issue relating to either whether these countries are engaging fiscal squandering or by raising these primary balances, it is more like you are going to choke opportunities for growth. So basically looking at this issue of freezing employment, which has been addressed earlier, I understand in 2016 there was a similar situation. So perhaps you could just comment the extent to which that particular freezing of employment in the public sector helped to address that particular issue of primary deficits. Thank you.
Oh, there's one more question. Oh, I can't see any other question in the chat box. So, maybe you can come and read the question, please. Oh, there's a hand raised. Oh, right. Okay. And maybe ask that question. Oh, so there's Ken.
Good morning.
Okay, Ken, go ahead. Let's ask the question.
Okay, thank you. My question is just picking up from where your comment about the freeze that on government hiring. I was thinking if we've gotten to that level that we are freezing hiring, then shouldn't it be that some of the things that government that is doing, like for example, housing, which is not really its primary role, shouldn't that be also be frozen so that if we are at a level that we are distressed, shouldn't we freeze even some of the activities which are not really core government activities, so that what remains funds, um, interest and those payments for loans and critical government activities.
This question.
Thank you.
Definitely by this question. In the meantime, so we have a couple of questions from Martin, Mr. Yotelo, and Simi. We haven't had any question from any of the ladies, so since it's our last one, can I have any lady who has a question to ask? Right, okay. Fine, let's go to reverse it before this time, so we can start with you three. Any of the questions?
Thanks for your questions and comments. I'll start with the question from Martin, and still go back to the presentation on debt as a percentage of GDP. I forgot to mention that for 2020, 2023, 2024, the figures are just projections because we got this information from the budget policy statement. So these are just projections, but they're projected to have lower rates of debt as a percentage of GDP because they are implementing the fiscal consolidation strategy, which is meant to reduce the debts, overall debts in the economy. So we are yet to see if this is actually the case. So these are just projections. I forgot to mention that. On debt servicing, the question on debt servicing, whether we have hope. If you look at the 2024 debt strategy paper, this rate as a percentage of revenue has gone up to around 50%. And I mentioned earlier the rate of at which the government is borrowing domestically has also gone up. The interest rates are right now for 91 bill is at around 16%. So if we are borrowing at very high rates, we don't expect the debt servicing to go down. So to round up on that, I think we don't have hope on that. The servicing cost is going to go up because we are borrowing at very high interest rates. Thank you.
I think they has responded to the first two questions. The only thing that I would add is Martin's question as on debt as a share of GDP, implying or sort of showing that the number has reduced. I think the more useful metric for consideration here would be looking at debts vis-a-vis the revenues. So it may appear as though debt as a share of GDP is reducing, but then I think you know that GDP is merely just a measure of the total value added to the economy. So the total economic output, and it may be as a result of various factors, including the development projects, the advancement of different infrastructure projects, and so on. But when it comes to repayment of our debts, we do not pay debt from GDP. We pay our debt from the revenues. So even so, that number might not be a very accurate reflection of the current debt situation. So I think in addition to what we have said, I'd just add that. And then I would agree, this is now my personal view, I would agree with Ayodo regarding the wage bill harmonization, that it would actually be sensible to categorize that recruitment, much as we've had the arguments for why it's sensible to freeze, recruitment, given the current fiscal consolidation efforts and the unsustainable wage bill. On the one hand, I think then the balance, trying to balance and see what sectors then would require a freeze and which ones not to, but then do that again in addition to harmonization of the wage bill and their other and all the other fiscal consolidation requirements, including an audit of the payroll. We in our analysis we've been finding that the payroll there has been quite a number. There is payroll fraud, if I could call it that, or the issue of ghost workers. So there is need for government to do a comprehensive audit of its payroll system as part of the fiscal consolidation. So thanks.
Thank you very much. I think most of the questions have been handled. Let me share a question that was asked online on this particular department. I think this is the question that was asked about the State Department of Environment, Water and Natural Resources. Remember, the figure that we have shared here, these are aggregated figures. Because if you go down the line to check the specific state department, this sector have got five state department. One is State Department for Wildlife, State Department for Forestry, Environment, and Water and Sanitation. And therefore, the figure that I have shared there, or the graph that I have shared there, might not be a representative of the specific sector. And therefore, we will be able to share the numbers in terms of the allocation to that particular sector. But obviously, in terms of water and sanitation, the development component actually takes a huge amount of resources because and recurrent expenditure actually it's like 30 to 70% in terms of proportions. Why? Because development in terms of water, I know there are some water services. They actually generate revenues, but that revenue actually is transferred to those particular bodies. But in terms of allocating resources, most of the resources for that particular sector goes to building of dams and building some infrastructure for that particular sector. The other question on from Ayodo, I think the issue of wage bill, I think that one has been answered well. Tax proposals, you share your concerns of we are projecting to raise 331 or 377 billion in terms of what we want to generate more, but in terms of counterfeit, the country loses more than 400 billion shillings, and the question is as to whether we can be able to see those loopholes. I think Kenya Revenue Authority, I think this is something that they also need to pick up to make sure that we do not have counterfeit in this country, so that we are able to use locally manufactured products. I agree with you in terms of pensions, that if we are able to have a contributory pension scheme, where our funds, once we do our contributions, is invested properly, then I think we should not have that voice of complaining each and every time. And you know, government officers, most likely they do not have a contributory funds, and that's the reason why most of their charges, they are usually in the CFS. And I don't know, we need to come up with a policy so that we can be able to have a better way of making sure that the public service can be able to have their funds saved in a contributory scheme, so that when the retirement age comes, then they are able to access their funds easily. So that's, I think, one way to handle the question on IMF. Thanks.
There are a couple of two questions, one by Ken. So let me talk about that. Ken is asking about whether what's the rationale for government to suspend hiring of staff, especially in important sectors such as education, because of a deficit. Guys, in the adult world, people have needs, right? And there are things you can afford. So if the arrangement of government is such that it is not possible to release some people from work, and you cannot afford to pay more teachers, then that's the decision you make, understanding that it's a difficult decision, but that's it. We have to be careful forcing government to employ people it will not be able to pay. As you know, even last year, there are pensioners who were due to receive their money. By March of this year, some people who had not received their March pension, their pensions for December. So I'm not too sure that I think we have to live in the other world, that you pay as taxpayers, government should pay for the things we can afford. Now, there might be something about how you rationalize expenditure. Teachers are required more than maybe people who do some other job. That's a conversation that has to be had. But we cannot say hire people that you can't pay. That's irresponsible for government to actually neglect its obligations contractually to not pay people. So however emotional we are about the employment of PSS teachers and they are required, we have to ask ourselves, is the cash available to pay them? The government is giving us the advice that maybe that cash is not available. And we might have to have a conversation for what then needs to be cut to pay that. But the idea that it is available here, they must be employed. And I don't think that's responsible budgeting, and it is not consistent with the Article 201 of the Constitution, which requires that the burden of taxation should be shared fairly. Taxes should reflect and payments should reflect to the extent that is possible. What is affordable, but at the same time, the Parliament must be prudent. So prudence sometimes requires that yes, ones are available, but we deal with it according to what the income sources that are available can do. So that's part of it. So how we optimize the distribution of teachers is probably what needs to be done. And anyway, this is suspension for just another year. So maybe that's not to defend it, but it's to actually acknowledge that the public fiscus is in very tight conditions. So I think stamping our feet off the ground and insisting and throwing tantrums about the employment of one person with the other is not sensible, I feel this time. And he asked the other question about affordable housing. I think as the Institute of Economic Affairs had our own argument in affordable housing last year, we lost it. Many Kenyans told us to be self-controlled and telling us that we think we are privileged. Some people will have houses. It's 1 year later. Houses have not been built. The state government has lent itself that money by buying into treasury bills. And therefore lent itself that same money that was supposed to be 20 billion that's supposed to be used. So yeah, that's it. So I don't know that we can say much more about the affordable housing bill. But yes, regardless, I and my colleagues pay because it's a tax and we have to pay. The final question is about SMU, about debt service write-off. Kenya has never sought a write-off of its debt. So a write-off never takes place unless you're in a risk of default, which is not apparent now, especially after government made the big decision to pay for the Euro. So I don't think it's a discussion that the government of Kenya has had. And early this year, you remember the government had promised that there would be no defaults. There was a very quote-unquote heroic effort to make sure that default did not happen. So the risks have been kicked into the future. Let's watch about it. But there's no conversation. We read the release from the IMF. There's no indication from that statement. We really need to play that there was a discussion about it. So that's just it. So ladies and gentlemen, unless there's any other question, any of my colleagues want to finish up with anything, we are very grateful for your being here. Thank you very much. And we appreciate you being here. For the members of the Institute of Economic Affairs, thanks for supporting this work. And for the media, thanks for this coverage. And we hope to find content that will be useful for informing your viewers and your readers. Thank you very much for coming on. That's before I close. We have the full analysis, which is the function for you, which is the numbers as presented yesterday and the other budget documents that came in a month ago. And you can use them available for distribution. It's also available on our website. This presentation is available on the IEA website as well. And half an hour after we close this meeting, and we hope